There are places where silence seems too heavy for the wind to carry, and the desert of New Mexico is one of them. Beneath its stillness lies a disturbing reminder that time does not erase what refuses to be forgotten. The West Mesa is such a place where the ground itself once whispered its secrets to a passing storm. As the rain carved through the earth, it revealed an unsolved mystery that chilled an entire nation. A cold case spanning more than a decade, born from mass graves hidden beneath sun-bleached soil, and shaped by a dark past that Albuquerque never meant to confront. This story is not merely about crime, but about the shadows people leave behind. Tonight, we enter the world of the West Mesa case, one of the most unnerving mysteries in American true crime history. The sky over Albuquerque stretches wide and pale, a vast desert canvas washed in tones of gold, sand, and fading blue. When the wind sweeps across the West Mesa, it carries a dry hiss sliding past scrub bushes and brittle cactus spines like a whisper from something long buried. Locals always said the deserts kept its secrets. No one imagined those secrets would one day rise to the surface. For years, the West Mesa was nothing more than an open space. On the edge of the city, a place where joggers followed dusty trails, families walked their dogs at sunset, and teenagers dared each other to explore after dark. It was quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. But in February 2009, after days of heavy rain, the soil shifted, the wind changed, and in the churned-up earth, a bone appeared. Then, another. The truth had finally clawed its way out of the ground. The discovery shattered the illusion of calm that Albuquerque had always tried to maintain. What lay beneath the desert floor was not a single tragedy, but a collection of lives, women who had vanished without explanation, whose families had spent years searching, hoping, begging for answers. The West Mesa was no longer a place to relax or wander. It had become a graveyard, silent, but screaming. Most of the victims were young, some barely out of childhood. Others just beginning to imagine a future they might someday rebuild. Their ages ranged from 15 to 32, a span of years marked by struggle, hope, relapse, survival, and the desire to start again. Behind each name on the investigation list was a story that had started long before the desert swallowed it. A daughter who loved drawing, a mother who kept a photo of her child folded in her pocket, a friend who used to share cigarette breaks behind a convenience store. Some of them dreamed of returning to school, finishing their GED, or earning enough money to escape the chaos that had shaped their daily lives. They talked about next month, next year, one day. They imagined new versions of themselves, cleaner, safer, steadier. But life in the margins of Albuquerque was not forgiving. Many of the women had been caught in the pull of addiction, pulled between bad choices and worse circumstances. Some had no stable place to sleep. Some drifted through motels, shelters, or unfamiliar couches. Others had simply disappeared from view as the world moved on around them. These women were more than victims. They were lives interrupted, futures stolen, and stories cut short before anyone realized how fragile they had become. Even before the graves were found, the disappearances had drawn attention from families, social workers, and law enforcement. The people connected to the victims formed a web of relationships, some supportive, some destructive. There were boyfriends with tempers, men known for sudden bursts of anger or controlling behavior. Some partners hovered constantly, checking messages, questioning whereabouts, showing up unannounced, little habits that revealed deeper cracks. Others had criminal records, histories of violence, or erratic behavior that made investigators take a second look. There were acquaintances and strangers who drifted through the women's lives, clients they barely knew, people who offered rides at odd hours, or men who hung around the motels and street corners where the women were last seen. Some lied about when they had seen them last. Some changed their stories. Some seemed too eager to help, lingering around investigators as if watching for mistakes. And then there were figures who triggered quiet suspicion, not because of any single piece of evidence, but because of patterns, small psychological red flags. Someone who constantly asked about the missing women, someone obsessed with local crime reports, someone who seemed to enjoy the attention, people who liked power, people who liked control, people who didn't realize their quirks would be remembered later. No one fit perfectly. No one could be ruled out. The mystery grew heavier with every interview taken and every contradiction recorded. On the surface, Albuquerque looks like a mosaic of warm colors and southwestern charm sun-baked houses, food trucks on street corners, murals splashed across concrete walls. But behind the postcard image lies a city wrestling with long-standing struggles: drug addiction, poverty, unstable housing, and the grip of local gangs. Many families of the victims had already been carrying their own burdens. Some dealt with cycles of domestic violence. Some had lost relatives to addiction. Some had histories of running away, homelessness, or childhood trauma that never healed. A few were fractured long before the women vanished, left to search for their missing daughters with little support and even fewer resources. In towns like this, where everyone thinks they know everything about everyone, the reality is that most people only see what's in front of them. They know the smiling faces, not the nights spent wandering the streets. They know the stories told at cookouts, not the ones whispered behind closed doors. The truth of the city is layered, shifting like the desert soil itself. Albuquerque was a city of quiet facades and hidden fractures, a place where secrets could linger unnoticed for years. Danger did not announce itself. It blended seamlessly into the everyday rhythm of streets, homes, and open desert. People came and went, lives unfolded, and yet beneath the surface, the city carried unseen weight. Someone could disappear, vanish without a trace, and the world might barely pause to notice. The ordinary masked the extraordinary, and the extraordinary remained concealed in plain sight. That was why the desert kept its silence for so long. Its arid winds and shifting sands preserved more than just soil. They preserved stories, choices, and tragedies that had no witness. Bones lay hidden beneath layers of earth, the earth itself holding the truth with a patient, almost deliberate secrecy. The quiet was not absence. It was a presence, dense and heavy, waiting. When the truth finally emerged, it struck like a cold wind across the city. The shadows over the desert had always been there, stretching across the land and the lives of those who lived nearby. The city had simply chosen not to see, until the silence could no longer hold. Long before the desert revealed its secrets, the nights in Albuquerque carried a quiet, persistent tension. It was the kind of uneasiness that settled in the spaces between streetlights, in the long stretches of empty road, where anything could happen and no one would see. The city appeared calm on the surface, but beneath that calm, something unexplainable was building: a series of small, fractured moments that would later form a pattern, only visible in hindsight. For the women who had become the victims of the West Mesa case, the final hours before their disappearance were often unremarkable, almost ordinary. Yet those hours were marked by subtle disturbances. The last person to see them was usually someone familiar. A boyfriend whose moods shifted unpredictably, a close friend who believed the night was normal, or a client whose name might never be known, whose presence faded immediately after they drove away. In the days and weeks leading up to their disappearance, small signs appeared that went largely unnoticed. Panic messages sent in fragments, half-formed pleas for help that ended abruptly. A sister might receive a text saying, "Something's wrong. Call me," only for the phone to go silent seconds later. Calls would cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static or nothing at all. Some of the women confided in friends about the sense of being watched. A car passing too slowly down their street. A stranger asking too many questions. A fleeting, inexplicable feeling of someone behind them, even when the street appeared empty. The dread they described was unplaceable, intangible, yet persistent. Life in Albuquerque was chaotic and unpredictable. People disappeared for a night or two all the time, especially among vulnerable populations. Addiction, unstable housing, and personal struggles were common. These circumstances masked danger, making it difficult for anyone to recognize patterns until it was too late. No one saw the danger forming. No one noticed the small moments stacking into a larger design. Not yet. Most of the disappearances fell into the same vulnerable window, between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., a period when the world was quiet enough to swallow sound and dark enough to hide intention. Different neighborhoods recalled the same strange details. A truck sometimes white, sometimes dark, moving slowly down side streets. Headlights flicking off for brief moments, as if someone wanted to avoid detection. The hum of an engine cutting through the still night, only to vanish again into silence. There were no screams, no shouts, no commotion. What occurred was silent, almost as if the desert itself had absorbed the noise. One woman was last seen stepping hesitantly into a vehicle she seemed unsure about. Another had been on the phone when she suddenly stopped talking, the line remaining open but filled only with quiet. A third was walking toward a convenience store, a block from a busy intersection. And then, nothing. It was as though they simply slipped out of existence, leaving behind scattered questions and empty rooms. The night everything changed was not a single event. It was dozens of small, invisible moments spread across months and even years, building into something beyond comprehension. When families realized their loved ones were missing, they followed the only steps they knew: phone calls to hospitals, shelters, friends, and eventually, the police. But at first, the responses were slow, indifferent, frustrating. Maybe she left town for a while. She has a history of disappearing. She'd probably come back. In some cases, reports weren't even filed immediately. The women's personnel's drug addiction, unstable housing, time spent on dangerous streets were used to justify delayed concern. Yet the families knew better. They knew routines, rhythms, and habits. A mother who called her child every Sunday wouldn't suddenly stop. A friend who never went anywhere without her small backpack wouldn't leave it behind. When the phones went silent, it wasn't voluntary. Meanwhile, those connected to the victims began exhibiting behavior that drew subtle suspicion. A boyfriend who had once been eager to cooperate suddenly refused to answer questions. A man living nearby packed up and left Albuquerque overnight. Someone close to a victim claimed to forget details previously remembered only a day before. Objects vanished. Phones were wiped clean. Clothes discarded. Journals or notebooks disappeared without explanation. Nothing was concrete enough to accuse anyone. Yet every missing detail became another stone, adding to an invisible weight that pressed against the families and investigators alike. Months passed, in some cases, years. Families searched on their own, posting flyers, making calls, holding hope against hope. Then came the rain of 2009. And with it, the desert gave up its first secrets. The bones. Once the desert floor gave way, the investigation shifted violently. These were no longer isolated disappearances. The women were linked not just by circumstance, but by geography and fate. As excavations progressed, investigators noticed something deeply unsettling. The remains weren't scattered randomly. They weren't haphazard or chaotic. Instead, some were placed in a formation, subtle, but unmistakably deliberate. Not a perfect grid. Not a symbol, but a pattern that defied coincidence. The spacing was too consistent, the angles too intentional. Someone had arranged them. The realization hit detectives with a chilling clarity. This was not merely a series of women who had vanished. It was not a string of unrelated tragedies. Someone had planned this. Someone had chosen the placement, measured the spacing, and acted with time and precision. The implications were terrifying. Was this truly a routine missing persons case, or the calculated work of someone far more meticulous and methodical than anyone could imagine? The desert, patient and silent, had concealed intention for years, and now that silence had been broken, revealing a truth that shook Albuquerque to its core. The night everything changed was not a single night, but a collection of countless small, almost invisible actions, stretching across time and space, all pointing to a mind that was deliberate, calculating, and horrifyingly patient. It was a reminder that danger often hides in plain sight, that tragedy can unfold quietly, and that the desert does not speak unless it chooses to end. When it does, the world is forced to listen. When the desert revealed its hidden truths, investigators faced an immense challenge. Reconstructing the lives and final movements of each missing woman required painstaking effort, retracing every step, choice, and contact, often years after their disappearance. Time had eroded memories, erased alivis, and buried critical evidence beneath dust and neglect. The initial investigation was fraught with obstacles. Malfunctioning surveillance cameras, overlooked logs, and tire tracks. Washed away by rain, multiple potential suspects were interviewed, all with connections to the victims. yet none produced sufficient evidence. Conflicting statements and fading memories left patterns as elusive as footprints swept away by the desert wind. Even as detectives worked tirelessly, the public's imagination ran wild. Media outlets quickly seized on the story, giving it a haunting name: the West Mesa Bone Collector. The title alone evoked images of a methodical predator, someone who collected victims as if they were objects rather than human lives. Headlines splashed across newspapers and online forums, igniting debates and speculation in every corner of Albuquerque and beyond. Was this a serial killer operating alone, precise and patient, or the work of a group connected by crime or revenge, hiding behind the veil of the city's darker corners? Families were thrust into the harsh spotlight, facing relentless media scrutiny and social media speculation. Rumors judged the victims' choices and lifestyles, while loved ones bore unbearable guilt. Amid this pressure and grief, 3 central theories emerged, each attempting to make sense of the incomprehensible disappearances and the unsettling pattern the West Mesa case revealed. Theory A: personal motive. Some suggested the perpetrator was someone who knew the victims personally, a man with psychological instability, capable of choosing targets based on emotion rather than opportunity. Someone whose behavior was obsessive, controlling, and unpredictable. In this scenario, the disappearances were not random. Each act was shaped by personal grievances or desires, small offenses magnified into catastrophic consequences. The psychological profile implied a mind capable of compartmentalizing empathy and malice acting in silence, ensuring the world remained unaware until the desert eventually betrayed him. Theory B: organized crime. Others considered the possibility of a coordinated effort. A group or network, perhaps tied to drug trade or local criminal activity, could have methodically targeted vulnerable individuals. In this hypothesis, the arrangement of the remains, the timing of the disappearances, and the apparent care taken in concealing bodies suggested premeditation beyond a single mind. The desert itself became a stage 4 calculated action, a hidden canvas where violence was executed with deliberate control, yet detached from the chaos of urban oversight. The victims might have been collateral damage in a system where exploitation and survival intersected. Theory C: an unseen predator. A third possibility was more unsettling. Someone entirely anonymous, a predator who had no prior connection to the victims. This scenario portrayed a person drawn to the vulnerable, who found opportunity in the margins of the city's overlooked population. Unlike Theory A, there was no personal grievance. Unlike Theory B, no network orchestrated the acts. This individual operated with precision, selection guided by vulnerability and circumstance, a person who could remain hidden in plain sight, blending into Albuquerque's everyday life while orchestrating a pattern invisible to everyone but the desert itself. Each theory carried weight, yet each was flawed. Evidence could support one hypothesis while undermining another. Despite painstaking reconstruction, the desert preserved part of its secret. Investigators were left with fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit, pieces suggesting deliberate intention but never revealing a face. The uncertainty hung heavily over families, detectives, and the public alike, a constant reminder that understanding human cruelty is rarely straightforward. The question persisted: if you were in their place, which theory would you trust? The personal motives of someone familiar, the coordinated planning of organized crime, or the randomness of an unknown predator? Each option brought its own dread, forcing those seeking answers to confront uncomfortable truths about control, chance, and the darker aspects of human nature. Then came a discovery subtle but profound. A small bone fragment, initially overlooked, belonged not to a known victim but to a 15th previously unidentified woman. This revelation shattered assumptions, blurred old theories, and demanded the case be reimagined entirely. With this fragment, the case became more than the sum of its parts. It illustrated how incomplete knowledge can create false confidence, how a single overlooked element can collapse established reasoning. Investigators realized that for every certainty they held, the desert held another secret, waiting patiently beneath the sand. What had once seemed explainable now appeared deliberately opaque, as though the perpetrator or perpetrators had anticipated discovery and obscured their pattern intentionally. The West Mesa case, once a string of disappearances, was no longer merely tragic. It had become a study in the limits of perception, a mirror reflecting society's assumptions, and a warning about the dangers of simplification in the face of calculated malevolence. Theories were only as solid as the evidence behind them, and evidence in this case was fleeting, buried both physically and metaphorically. It was also a stark reminder of how a community responds to uncertainty. Fear, speculation, and anxiety filled the spaces left by the unknown. Media narratives shaped perception. Social pressures intensified grief, and families navigated both the crime and its public aftermath. Each story, each report, added another layer of complexity, forcing investigators to consider not only the physical evidence, but also the social and psychological environment surrounding the victims. And yet, amid all speculation and conjecture, one truth remained undeniable. The desert had more to reveal. Every shift in the earth, every uncovered bone, challenged what was previously understood. The new discovery of the 15th victim was a pivotal moment, stark indication that assumptions can mislead, and that in cases like this, the truth is as patient and persistent as the desert itself. No matter how many hypotheses were formed, no matter how deeply the investigators analyzed behaviors, motives, and social connections, there remained the unshakable sense that the West Mesa case was far from ordinary. The desert, with its vast, silent expanse, had shown that beneath apparent randomness lay deliberate intention, and the work of uncovering it had only just begun. To understand the West Mesa case, one must look beyond the surface and into the mind behind such calculated disappearances. The evidence, subtle yet unmistakable, reveals a predator defined by extraordinary patience and an unyielding need for control. This is not a mind driven by impulse. It measures, calculates, and selects the precise moment to act. Each movement, each choice, reflects a psychological profile of cold detachment, a capacity to completely disassociate from the suffering inflicted. Planning, observation, and methodical execution are hallmarks of a mind both meticulous and disturbingly unfeeling. From a Buddhist perspective, such behavior reflects the extremes of Thamsan Sigrid, anger, and ignorance. These three poisons, when unchecked, can transform ordinary human impulses into acts of profound cruelty. In this context, the perpetrator's choices are more than criminal. They are a manifestation of an internal moral collapse, a mind where the boundaries between self-interest and harm have dissolved entirely. The desert, silent and unyielding, became a stage for these impulses, a space where the consequences of unrestrained desires unfolded invisibly over time. A Stoic lens offers another interpretation. Stoicism emphasizes self-control, discipline, and the alignment of one's actions with reason and virtue. Here, however, we see a perversion of that principle. An empty space where discipline exists without morality. The killer demonstrates focus, endurance, and precision, but applied toward domination rather than justice or virtue. It is a chilling study in how human capacity for order and patience can be twisted into methodical, intentional destruction. Examining the burial locations reveals chilling insight into the perpetrator's mind. The arrangement of the remains shows not random placement but careful planning, suggesting intimate knowledge of the West Mesa terrain. Each burial leveraged natural features, subtle markers, and sightlines that allowed concealment in plain view. Paths through the desert, vantage points for observation, and the spacing between remains indicate tactical awareness and forethought. Every act was deliberate, executed with precision, balancing environmental conditions and human behavior. The choices reflect a methodical, calculating mind, one that understood both the geography and the psychology of the victims, leaving evidence of planning even in silence. A detail often overlooked is the timing of the disappearances relative to weather patterns. Several of the victims vanished on nights sharing similar conditions: clear skies, low humidity, or minimal wind. This hints at ritualistic or procedural thinking, a compulsion to act under controlled circumstances. It is as if the perpetrator required the environment to conform to his own internal standards, reinforcing the notion of a ritualized methodology underlying seemingly chaotic events. The unresolved nature of the case deepens its psychological impact. Families live in a state of perpetual uncertainty, forced to navigate grief without closure. Each unanswered question adds weight, a constant reminder that the predator may still exist, unaccounted for, and that justice remains incomplete. The social consequences ripple outward. Communities feel unsafe, routines are disrupted, and a pervasive sense of suspicion lingers in spaces once considered familiar. Albuquerque, a city with a vibrant and resilient culture, carries a scar that no time has yet healed. Beyond the immediate emotional toll, there is a broader philosophical reflection to consider. How do we interpret fear when it exists without resolution? The West Mesa case is a study in the human capacity for anxiety. The tension of knowing that malevolence exists in a form that is not visible, not easily contained. In this silence, the mind oscillates between logic and instinct, creating its own narratives to fill the void left by uncertainty. It is a reminder that horror does not always announce itself with noise. It often breathes quietly, shaping lives in its absence as much as in its presence. For investigators, the unresolved elements suggest new avenues, behavioral patterns, terrain familiarity, and environmental timing all point toward a perpetrator with specific knowledge and deliberate habits. Understanding this psychology could refine search strategies, predict potential behaviors, or even identify connections previously missed. Yet, any insight into the mind of the offender also confronts us with the unsettling reality. The capability for continued harm remains, and the desert may yet hold secrets not uncovered. And then comes the philosophical question, the one that lingers after every analytical thought. What is more frightening, the knowledge that a killer has escaped justice, or the possibility that he may have never truly stopped, that the pattern of his mind continues unbroken? This ambiguity is perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case. It forces reflection on human nature, on the limits of perception, and on the fragile assumptions we make about safety and control. The West Mesa case is far more than a record of disappearances. It serves as a mirror reflecting the darkness that can dwell within the human mind. It is a cautionary tale about obsession, detachment, and the dangerous precision that can emerge when empathy is absent. Silence itself becomes a tool, a method by which cruelty can exist undisturbed. The desert, patient and unyielding, guards its secrets, even as investigators, families, and communities strive to uncover them. Every theory examined, every lead pursued, and every observation of behavior exposes a mind capable of meticulous calculation. Yet, these glimpses into the perpetrator's psyche also highlight the limits of our understanding. Even the most careful reconstruction cannot fully capture the breadth of intention or the depth of detachment at play. The desert absorbs evidence, memory, and certainty, leaving only fragments that hint at something far more calculated than anyone could have anticipated. In the quiet moments, when the wind stirs nothing but dust and memory, a chilling truth emerges. Understanding a mind like this is a journey without end. It is a descent into a calculated void, one that challenges our frameworks of morality, right and wrong. The West Mesa case forces us to confront not only crime, but the shadow of human potential for patient, deliberate cruelty. And so, the silence endures. Unanswered questions linger, and the desert remains a patient observer, its vast emptiness holding secrets that watch over the land with unyielding stillness. The West Mesa case reminds us that fear does not always dwell in shadows. Sometimes, it lingers in the silence of years, in unanswered questions, and in truths left unspoken. It forces us to confront a mirror of ourselves. If fear reflects our deepest uncertainties, do we dare to look directly at it? This story leaves many lessons about vigilance, the value of truth, and the fragile lives often forgotten beneath a vast and indifferent desert. It is a warning that darkness can thrive where attention wanes, and that silence can hide more than words ever could. If you wish to explore more stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mind.